Welcome to part two of Drive the Conversation, where we will be focusing on everything that's going on in Kenosha and just tying it to today's climate. We're going to do a really quick round of intros again and then just get straight into it. So again, my name is Jewel Faguni, pronouns she, her, and I am founder and CEO of You Matter Studios and the producer of the film The Drive, which is available on our YouTube channel. And I'm going to pass the mic to my awesome co-host, Ira.
Hello, my name is Ira Lazakino and I use she, her, hers. And for You Matter Studios, my role is Instructional Design Manager. And my day job is I'm a Civic Engagement Project Leader for a education non-for-profit in Chicago.
All right, so we will start with the introductions of our major panelists. So I will first pass it to Major Weddington.
Good morning. Thanks for having me. My name is Vincent Weddington. I'm a 28-year veteran of the Dallas Police Department. Title is Major, and my pronouns are he, him, and his. I'm going to pass it on to Johan.
Hello, my name is Joan Futa. I'm a software engineer. My pronouns him, his, and him, his. So I'm going to pass it to David.
Hi, my name is David. My pronouns are he, him, his, and I'm currently a student of graphic design and illustration at the Art Institute of Chicago. And I'll pass it on to Dr. Giwa.
Hi, my name is Sephora Giwa. I am the principal of Persian Magnet School in Bronzeville. My pronoun is she, her, hers. And I've been doing this for 29 years. And I'm gonna pass on to the next speaker.
Hi, everyone. My name is Marcus Towns, he, him, his. I am the vice president of Pure Alchemy Group, which is a educational nonprofit out of Chicago.
It's an awesome show. Y'all need to check out Pure Alchemy. Just gonna give you that plug. But first, okay, cool. Then welcome everyone. Thank you for being a part of this very important discussion. So let's dive into Kenosha. So I'd love everyone to just say one word that expresses the current relations between police and communities. And I'll kick it off and I'll say my word is volatile.
My word is strained.
My word would be mistrust, I guess.
My word is miscommunication.
I'll say tragedy.
I'm going to say salvageable.
Nuanced.
Yeah. So I just want you all to kind of complete this sentence. Jacob Blake is a reflection of
Mistrust. Mistrust between the police department and actions of Black men.
Jacob Blake is the personification of the fear that many officers have when it comes to dealing with Black males.
Jacob Blake, I'd say miscomprehension. I think just to say the same thing as Dr. Giwa. And miscomprehension between, as she really explained well, the acts and the way the police responded. So that would be my word.
Yeah, it's kind of hard for me to kind of put it into like a phrase, but it's kind of just something that it's unfortunately something that happens it's just a normal tale, right? Like in our previous episode, me and David Wayne kind of tied into what do we know and what do we not know. But it's the same thing is, another person from the Black community, like just being gunned down, to be honest. And I think it's just a reflection of what is currently happening and has been happening to disproportionately the Black community. So I just think the whole thing is tragic and my heart goes out to his family.
I live by an attitude that says, be understanding and compassionate to people, be ruthless if necessary against systems. So if I were to try to oversimplify this into what Jacob Blake personifies, I say the victim of an uneven power structure. Mm-hmm. And so for me, even for I could be mad at specific police officers, right? I could have issues with the officer who did those fatal shots. Perhaps officers were responsible for the no-knock warrant that resulted in Breonna Taylor's death. But ultimately, if I was just to bash officers all day, I wouldn't really be contributing much, because the problem is much bigger than officers of the law. So that's the challenge for us going forward, because it's so easy in a case like this to say, to start aiming our crosshairs at people. And that's, in Kenosha, kind of what, in the small scale, that's kind of what's been happening as an example of that. You know, the protesters against the militia, and then, you know, Rittenhouse and all that stuff. But ultimately, that conflict itself is not the, I wouldn't say it is not important, but that I'm not sure how it will address the bigger structural problem.
Well, I'm interested to hear about from Major Wedding, because we know the perspective that we as the public have been seeing throughout this whole 2020, it seems like, in terms of police behavior towards African Americans. But as an officer yourself, what perspective can you offer us to make us kind of understand how these misunderstandings and misbehavior, for lack of a better word, happens in the contact between these specific officers and the people that they're involved with?
I think what would shock many people is the amount of hours or training or lack thereof that many police departments require for someone to become a police officer. I'll give you an example. In the state of Texas, it takes more hours to become a beautician than it does to become a police officer. So the state minimum requirement in Dallas, we doubled the state minimum requirement, but in smaller departments, all they ask is the state minimum requirement. So in places like Kenosha and small places like that, you're going to have people out there that are minimally trained, marginally educated, and their response to a perceived threat is not going to be an intelligent response to a perceived threat. A lot of these places they have 0 college hours requirement. You can come right out of high school and become a police officer. And I've always said that if you had a more intelligent police force, you'd have a more intelligent response to a stimulus. So there are many facets as to why you're seeing this excessive use of force when it comes to police officers in America today. One of the things that we found out is that many young people, one of the questions we asked during the application process in Dallas is, have you ever been in a fight? And surprisingly, most of the young people that apply say, no, I've never been in a fight. Why not? Because if I got in a fight when I was in high school, I get expelled, or the other kids' parents may charge me with assault. And when I was a kid growing up in the 70s and 80s, that was the furthest thing from our mind. So what happens is today, the very first time they get into a physical altercation, because they've never been in a fight, they go straight for their tool belt. They go for their mace, they go for their taser, they go for their gun. And I think this was exemplified really in what happened in Atlanta. You had 2 officers in the parking lot with 1 suspect. 2 officers, 1 suspect. They are wrestling and fighting with him on the ground, and they weren't able to subdue him physically. And when he got up and grabbed the taser, they shot him in the back as he was running away. That probably would not have happened 20, 25 years ago in a police department, because most of the officers could handle themselves physically. There would be no need to do that. I've been on the police department almost 29 years. I've never carried a taser when I was out in the street. I didn't have all those tools on my tool belt because we were trained to use our hands versus using the tool belt. So those are some of the reasons you're seeing this excessive use of force. The obvious one is the 800-pound elephant in the room is fear. When you have people that are fearful of the people they are sworn to serve and protect, you will see an excessive use of force because they are afraid. And when you are afraid, fearful, you will always heighten your response to a perceived threat.
I also have a follow-up question for Major Wellington. With what you have just said, the state minimum requirements, like at least for Dallas, like that's something that is an issue all over the U.S. I really like what you said about like if we have a more intelligent force in there, it will be a more intelligent response to stimulus. So like, what additions or specific like augmentations to the training is necessary? So like Kenosha doesn't happen again? What training is necessary to like prevent that from being almost a pandemic?
Well, there are going to need to be some reforms in police work. I've always said that the minimum educational standard for a police officer should be a college degree, just like the
Yeah.
FBI requires a college degree.
Amen.
Also, there needs to be yearly mental health evaluations of officers yearly. There's a professional secret, really not a secret. About 25% of the male officers on any police department are going to be alcoholics. And that's why we need to have robust mental health evaluations yearly on officers. We have to qualify at the pistol range every year, need to qualify mentally, make sure you're in good mental health every year. There are some other things that need to be addressed, like qualified immunity. If qualified immunity went away, I guarantee you would see officers coloring within the lines when it comes to use of force. So there are a myriad of things that need to be reformed, so that if you had those reforms, you probably wouldn't see this excessive use of force when it comes to police across the United States.
So, Major, I have just a question. Don't you think that also the responsibility is in the hand of our leaders? Like, I have the feeling that whether it's Democrat or Republican, it's just every time we want to talk about like law and order, it becomes an issue of being patriotic instead of public safety and normalization of the relationship between the police and the community. So every time we try, I mean, all the possible reforms that you've just talked about, if that debate goes up to the national, to the public opinion, then some people will be labeled as unpatriotic for not standing with the police. Some others will be labeled as I don't know, thugs or something. As someone who came here 4 years ago or 5 years ago, I think it's just a matter of courage, which is lacking among our leaders, not addressing the tough, uh, not addressing the tough issues, and also to talk about what David just said at the beginning. The reason why people are now embracing this wagon of, I mean, this train of talking badly about police force is because our leaders don't do anything. If we had good leaders who would be willing to discuss about very difficult topics, this wouldn't be happening. At least that's my opinion.
Certainly. I've always said that if the leaders don't grab this and run with it, the people will, and that's what has happened. This has become a grassroots effort. And make no mistake, in 2020, it's just the straw that broke the camel's back. This conversation has gone on in Black families for 150 years in this country. And this what we're seeing is nothing new. Absolutely nothing new. It is the absolute reason why I became a police officer, because of what happened to me as a college student at the University of Pittsburgh in 1982. So this is something that is endemic. It's been going on in this country since police departments were established, and we've reached a breaking point. And I believe that the people, because the one thing that everybody needs to understand is that the police work for you. It's not the other way around. They work for you. They are your servants. They do your bidding. You pay them. You should always remember that. They are your employees. The citizen is the customer. And there is an old adage I learned a long time ago that said, the customer is always right. And so you get to dictate to us how you want to be policed, not the other way around. And you need to remember that. So if the citizen says, I don't want to be policed this way, this is the way I want to be policed, we have to adjust. It is our job to adjust to what the citizens want. And it's going to be a difficult adjustment for a lot of people who believe it's the other way around. If you ask the average police officer in Chicago or Dallas, it doesn't matter. If you ask them a simple question, who do you work for? They're going to say, I work for the chief. No, you work for the citizens. And they don't understand that. They don't understand that they are servants. They believe they are warriors. They're not.
Yeah.
That's really powerful. I with that actually, like, I want to ask like the rest of the panel, like, as a member of the community, what tools would you want your police officer to have to truly feel protected?
So we had a school officer that worked with our school a few years ago, and he worked very hard to recreate a relationship with the students where it wasn't a relationship based on fear or based on domination, or where they feel like when they see the police coming, they had to hide and run. He built a mentorship where he was able to support them. He would play basketball with them. He actually started a basketball league where he would engage with the children at in a non-threatening, very casual way. And this went a long way in changing the way the students view them. And I feel like this is part of the change that needs to happen, as well as community policing. We used to have the CAPS meeting in Chicago. I don't know what happens to that, but it used to be once a month, the neighborhood got together and we talked about some of the things that we saw that was going on, and actually passed on information on what was going on that we thought shouldn't be going on. And that went a long way in reducing the crime in the community and building also infrastructure of trust with the police department. So I feel like the more we could develop these communal relationships and have them to be able to see each other as human beings rather than objects to be protected, I think that's how we start to change these relationships.
And I think just to add on to what Dr. Giwa is saying is having these kind of conversations in communities as well. So if you think about Trayvon Martin, he was shot by a neighborhood person that was acting as neighborhood watch. So that really plays into like building those strong community relationships, recognizing, hey, we may look different in this neighborhood, but we still got to have each other's backs. So I just kind of want to add that point too, with the importance of building community.
I live in a white suburb. We're 88% white here, and the median income is $188,000 per household. What does the police force look like here? Well, they need a bachelor's degree from a credit college or university, between 20 to 35 years old, and then all the other requirements, good physical health, good moral characters. In practice, what the police looks like here is that they're non-existent. They're so low key that they're just driving around and you won't notice them. They're just there. And the idea is that, well, here they don't have to do anything. They're not going out of their way to write tickets. They're not even going out of the way to seek anything. They're just loitering around watching. And then if something comes up, they respond and they do what they can. And so in a potential vision of what policing could be like, well, you have we have right now in my neighborhood, the reality is that the police is non-confrontational, low-key, observant, but not intrusive in it. And then they basically serve as a sort of a secret line of defense against whatever may happen. And this is what it looks like in an affluent community with a lot of funding. So not only do we have police who are trained to a different expectation, and we also have police who have higher requirements, demanded of them at the same time. What Major Weddington said about education being a necessary part of policing struck me, because from what I see, and I've done research into this too, it is true. I think 88% of U.S. police departments don't require a college degree, and my hypothesis on this matter is, well, you have a policing system where the policing job, in terms of its pay, it pays higher than teachers. The benefits that it comes with it are also in many cases higher than what teachers. I'm just using teachers as a baseline. Yet at the same time, being a teacher requires a bachelor's degree to do what they do. And so what we have is a profession where in many places it is appealing for people coming out of high school, perhaps not in the top income bracket, who may be not able to afford college without significant debt. And they see policing as sort of a career option that could have, stable income, while without having while bypassing the, student debt and all that other requirements. At the same time, you have a system of training and ingrained kind of biases that have these people be sort of afraid of the people they're supposed to protect. And what we have then is a generation of young people and vital people, physically active people, who are afraid of the communities. And you have basically divided communities apart by granting some of them, the powers of the police and that authority that comes with it. And then basically subconsciously, in some ways turning them and driving an obstacle between them and their own communities. And so being able to break down that particular barrier to make sure that the police are not adversaries, or they are not viewed as adversaries of each other, that's a hard question. And I think a bachelor's degree or something, or a college degree of some kind, will go a long way to help to address that, simply because it is harder to influence a mind full of knowledge to those kind of ends. As for Major Weddington, I'm actually curious about very mundane things. What does the typical day of an officer look like in your department?
Dallas is a city that's about 1.5 million people, and we have about 3,100 police officers. So if you're a patrol officer, you go to roll call, you get out on the street, and immediately you start answering calls for service. On a typical day of an officer in the field, he's going to answer 10 to 12 calls for service. He may go to jail once. I doubt if he can go twice because of the length of time it takes to actually process someone into the jail. So during the course of his day, he's going from one call to the next call to the next call. Currently, we're about 650 officers short of where we need to be. So a patrol officer is extremely busy. He doesn't really have any downtime to focus on traditional high crime areas because he's going from one call to the next. So they are extremely busy, and they get all the violent crime. They're the first to arrive on all the violent crime, of course. So their day is pretty intense.
Do you feel that this particular schedule, how this thing is laid out, also has a negative impact on their psychology when dealing with these high stressful situations? If we're ladling all this work on a patrol officer, in addition, just suddenly thrusting them, not being able to focus on high crime areas or potentially violent areas, but at the same time, just being thrust into that situation by just how busy they are. It seems like it would be negatively impacting the psychology of officers who are working.
It certainly does, and that's probably why you have such a high rate of alcoholism, divorce, depression, things of that nature. It has a cumulative effect on someone if every day that you go to work, you're dealing with the criminal element, you're dealing with the human element. I've always said the criminal element is not what tears you down internally. It's the human tragedy. It's what tears you down internally. It wears on you and gives you PTSD. When I was a rookie officer in 1992, one of the first calls I went on, I was assigned to the housing projects here in Dallas. And I went to a call and mom was in the kitchen, and we got there and she was younger than me. And she said, they're upstairs. So I said, who's upstairs? She said, my daughter's upstairs. They're upstairs. So I went upstairs and there was a 13-year-old girl laying in the bed with her 24-year-old boyfriend with a 6-month-old baby. And I was just shocked. And I was like, what do y'all do? What is going on here? Why isn't this girl in school? B, why are you allowing this to occur under your roof? And those sorts of things make your blood boil, make your blood pressure go up. And if you're dealing with something like that every day, literally call after call after call, the human impact is what gets you. The danger factor is few and far between. That's why the danger factor is so dangerous, because you will answer 999 calls. Nothing will happen. On the 1000th call is when something will happen. So it's very little danger, if you will. A lot of human interaction is what tears you down.
Yeah, and I think that is the importance of us looking at it as a system and looking at what are the mental health services that are provided to officers. And like, just going back to the film that we created, The Drive, that's why we highlighted with the officer's perspective that he had lost his partner. So it commented on his headspace going into a situation. But I would like to bring us back to Kenosha. Do you all think Kenosha was what all the events that were happening in Kenosha, was that something reflective of just what happened in Kenosha, or is this like a US problem? And I'm talking about from not just what happened to James Blake, but with Kyle Rittenhouse and just with the protests and just like what's the climate there? What do you all think about that in the context of our country?
I'll jump in for this one.
Yeah.
I think that scenario is the all-encompassing form of what a trident is, right? I think that you look at 3 different aspects when you're looking at the Kenosha scenario specifically. You have race, you have politics, you have morality. And right now as a country, we all want something different, it seems like. But when you really dive into it, I think we can understand that we're all looking to go the same direction. We're all looking to change the institution, the structures that are at play currently for the better. I think we can all agree on that point. I think the pathway forward is the issue that we're having. And so when I look specifically at like the Jacob Blake scenario, right? Do I think it was strictly the police department? Personally, I don't. I will never bring down another Black man, but I am also quick to say, just like what I expect of the police department, I expect of my fellow brothers and sisters. I expect that we will look at each other behind the scenes and say, okay, let's change a couple of things. We're not doing this right. I expect the same from the police department. When I look at the specific scenario for Jacob Blake, right? He had, I hate to bring up past arrest records and all that, but he had been, or somebody in Kenosha had been arrested, gun at hand, by those police officers, and they were apprehended, no shots fired at all. So when you look at this specific scenario with those specific police officers, 1, the qualified immunity, it's got to go. 2, something needs to happen to them. Something needs to happen to Kyle Rittenhouse. I'm not defending him either, but at the end of the day, when I look at what I view as my team, fellow civilians, fellow, minorities, whatever, I got to make sure that we are viewing these structures, understanding that it's going to take effort on our end, and trying to be better and then change those structures as well. So while we can be better as, just people in general, to help, I hate to say help officers, but to help not make sure that we're all in the, crazy position, I think that we have become complacent in allowing these officers to feel like Major Weddington said, as soldiers, when instead they're not warriors, right? They're here to protect and serve, not just property, but people. So I think we need to be better demanding, and I'm glad it's at the grassroots level. And I'm glad people are out protesting now, because we need to see the change. I'm sick of every time I open the news seeing this happen again, right? We've had more police killings since what, 2001 than soldiers dead in Iraq. Like in a war, we've had less soldiers die than police killed at home. So when I look at these different scenarios and when I look at these structures at play, my mind has continually gone back to that trident, right? What are we valuing right now? We value race, we value morality, and we value our politics. How can we work together moving forward?
Yeah. And I want to piggyback off that is I think it's important that this conversation again does not only land on the Black community, right? And expanding it to everyone else and saying like we all have a place in this and holding our government to task, holding our decision makers to task, holding our systems to task, because as we have seen just the changes that have happened with just the eruption of protests around the nation, right? Because we know the Black Lives Matter movement has already, it's been existing, right? And it wasn't until, from what I perceived, when the video came out on George Floyd, that's when there was like a united, okay, we need to pay attention to this. And not just in the US, but globally. But I think like there is strength in numbers and there is strength in us really kind of advocating for this. But I also think like the unfortunate thing is there is a balance, right? Like, I don't know if we'll get to a space where it's like, okay, I can create the situation and I won't be profiled and I can come home alive today. Like, I don't know if we'll ever get to that spot. I actually saw, there's this one Black business owner that created like bulletproof like vests and clothing. And I think it's so sad. I think it's called thick skin. It's called thick skin. It's unfortunate that no matter what I see, it's going to take time to get there, but it's still something that's like, that's the climate we're in and we've been in. So yeah, but I definitely want to add the importance of us kind of just making sure that we're coming together.
I want to ask specifically, like Dr. Giwa, what are your thoughts about like CPS's decision to cut like the SRO funding, like almost like actually more than 50%, right? What would that look like in Pershing, and like what would that effect be when?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the school resource officers have their benefits. They are really critical for when we have extreme aberrant behaviors, but that's not an everyday thing. And I believe that 911 does serve as the resource for that. So we don't need a full-time officer, especially in an elementary school, policing our hallways. We are best served having more social workers there, more nurses, ways to attend to those conditions that create the need for those aberrant behavior to begin with. So I applaud CPS. I don't applaud them for not canceling the contract, but I applaud them for making an effort to at least cut the funding in half. And I applaud those school leaders who were very courageous in standing up against their general public and making sure that they cancel their contract and vote not to bring those school resource officers back on their campuses. I think the more school resource officers you have in a school, the more you create that prison to pipeline conditions. And it just creates an atmosphere that is not community oriented, friendly, nor is it family focused. And they're best served, like Major Whittington stated, they serve us, and they're best served serving the community and going to those high risk areas where they can really do good rather than policing small action done by children. So yeah, I don't believe that they're necessary.
All right, I'll lead us with our last question. And it is, how do you engage in these conversations with peers, especially if they can't relate to like the racial component?
How do the police relate?
Either or. So how do you engage your peers and also to have it translate into action in conversation?
It's very difficult for me to have my peers relate because most of my peers aren't from this city. They don't live in this city. They don't go to church in this city. Their children certainly don't go to school in this city. So it's a very difficult concept for a lot of them to, I'm one of the 3% of the officers that actually live in the city of Dallas. So it's very difficult to get them to understand the concept of trying to relate to the people that they are sworn to serve and protect. They don't have a a community type relationship with them. It's a them versus us mentality most of the time. So it's very difficult here. Chicago is different. I was born and raised in Chicago. Chicago police officers have to live in the city of Chicago. I grew up on 101st and Eberhart, and we had a police officer that lived on our street. Mr. Crawford was, so what I knew that police officers weren't the boogeyman because his daughter was one of my best friends. And I had a relationship with the police there because I knew him. And a lot of cities, that is not the case. So it's very difficult to build that relationship and get that conversation going between the police and the community. I don't even know if it's possible until we start making some reforms and getting and recruiting people that genuinely want to be a community police officer versus a warrior. It's like turning a cruise ship around. It takes a long time. And that's the process that we're in right now, trying to change that mentality of 150 years of policing from being what it was to what we want it to be moving forward. It's not going to occur overnight, but it's going to require the people to maintain that pressure on their local police departments that we're not going to tolerate how you all have been treating us in the past. We're not going to tolerate the type of policing you're doing. Actually, what they want is what David said. They want intelligent policing. They want policing that is correct, fair, and proper. They don't want to be over-policed. They don't want to be under-policed. They want proper policing. And that's all that they're asking for. But it's going to be difficult moving forward.
I think it's forcing the conversation, right? I think, Jewel, you and I, we both grew up in, or at least went to school in a very affluent, predominantly white community. And when you look at the way, it's similar to like what David said, right? Police weren't really around. They gave you speeding tickets. They pulled me over for a lot of stuff I wasn't doing, but for the average person, they weren't encountering police, routinely. The money was going into schools, it was health services. So the communities, there were so many other opportunities for at least the citizens to feel better and be able to grow before you even had to rely on the police, right? So it's forcing these uncomfortable situations. It's taking people who are not from these communities and bringing them and showing them what it's like. My family, a lot of them live in Milwaukee, so I spent my summers out there. It's taking those people from affluent communities into these neighborhoods and showing like, these police are different than the police you have. And the whole scenario around why is completely different, right? When they're driving around in what looks like tanks, right? Like help them with education, mental health services, so that they're not suffering from all these other, services, right? But I hate that, especially in politics, right? We've taken sentences and we made them like defund the police, right? Like it's not that, right? It's reallocate some of these funds so that you don't need to rely heavily and solely on police for all these things. Instead, put these in education so that people have opportunities, economic opportunities to go work, encourage small businesses, right? Do all these little things correctly. Don't just do, I hate that it has to be a slogan, right? Like let's put it in practice. So it's taking people, making them uncomfortable, showing them firsthand experience what it's like, and honestly what it's like in an affluent community for a minority, right? Making sure they see that firsthand, and then instead finding a new way forward. We have to do it. We have to do it. This cannot continue. And I'm gonna be honest, I don't think the younger generation is gonna allow it to continue much longer. This is a different breed of generations right now, so I don't see it continuing for too much longer.
Shout out to Gen Z, for real. What I see on the TikTok and how people are literally, they'll have dances and they'll be like, this is what defund the police is, or this is what the lived experience is, or the difference between like, what does all lives matter actually sound like when you hear yourself, and educating people, what does Black Lives Matter mean? So I just kind of want to amplify the fact that, yeah, I'm really excited about the Gen Z generation and how they're not tolerating this. But I also want to amplify a point that me and David brought up in our previous episode is importance of kind of meeting people where they're at too when we're trying to have conversations, if you have the patience, where you're trying to have conversations, is like, if you don't relate to the specific race component, how are you seeing the class inequity in your own life? Okay, cool, now you see it, that's how it's like for someone else. or like kind of putting people through an empathy exercise. So then they can at least meet you where you're at and having those conversations, because that's the importance of allyship. When you're having these conversations with people that aren't in your community, they can take that conversation to their communities and it trickles and it grows. So I just want to end with us on that. I'll take one more response and then we'll wrap up.
When Marcus mentioned politics, and when I talk about politics, and I think of politics in the not just in like parties and voting and stuff. I think of politics in the biggest sense as in a group of people making decisions for that group of people. And police and politics have the same roots. They come from the Greek word polis, meaning city. So politics is affair of the city, and police are instruments in executing the affairs of that city. And so in a way, they're not separable. They are part of the same vision. When we said like meeting people where they're at, if we take, for example, you mentioned, Marcus, that one area of Milwaukee's police might be different from another. And the hard part about politics is that slogans sell, but to execute the idea, you need endless amounts of nuance. If I was to speak with a rural Indiana white town, a farm town, and I said, we need to reform the police, they're going to look at you confused, because for them, the police already works. Their sheriffs are elected. They went to school with their deputies. Everybody knows each other. And so there's already, and their deputies and their police are integrated intimately into the fabric of their neighborhoods. And so when we talk to them, it's not just about, for example, I wouldn't say this is like the way to go. Is like maybe the framing will be different. Saying that, oh, well, our police is a little different from yours, and some of the elements of what you already have, we also want to adopt in ours. So it's not that we want to just change your police, it's that we're trying to learn from you what works for you as well and see if we can implement it for us. And that takes away the divisiveness of a simple, oversimplified slogan like defund the police, which nobody can agree on exactly what it means. Because everyone has a different idea of what it is. We are incentivized to think of these as factions. Just in Kenosha, we're incentivized to think of the Kenosha militia, which is like their, mostly white, native, armed, I guess you could say safety group. And then you have the police, which is a faction on their own. And then we have the protesters, which is a faction. Well, I think the question is, the problem now is that we are thinking of them as different factions, and that itself is a root core of the issue. Why isn't the police and the protesters and the militia part of the same faction? Because they're in the same community. They're all Kenoshans.
Well, I'm gonna wrap us up. There's so much we can do and there's so much we can expand, but that's why we have these conversations, is to continue to dive deeper into these topics. But I just want to give a shout out to everyone on the panel for really diving deeper into this topic, and just thanking our audience for tuning in to another episode of Drive the Conversation. We hope our conversation helps inspire you all to really share your perspectives and engage your communities, and really continue to drive this conversation. And also you can check out our film, The Drive, which is available on our YouTube channel, that addresses relations between police and communities. We hope it's a really great tool to help you spark these conversations as well. But yeah, with that said, stay tuned for our next episode on Drive the Conversation on our YouTube channel. And with that, I just want to say thank you again, everyone, and we will talk to you all later. All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.